What's up, Green Bay Packers fans? Welcome back. As always, thanks for joining me. My name is Paul Brettel. Today we're going to discuss the news that Jaire Alexander is most likely out for the rest of the season and what that means for the Packers' cornerback position with the playoffs right around the corner. But first, you know what to do. Hit like on the video. Hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. I do greatly appreciate it. You can follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. Find all my work, including the article versions of what we're discussing here today, over at ESPNLacrosse.com. And for my Wisconsin sports radio fans, Packers, Brewers, Bucks, Badgers, whatever you need, download the 105.5 ESPN Lacrosse app. You can find me on Sports Lead Monday through Friday, 3 to 6, multiple days per week. So, like I said, we're here to discuss the obvious big news that Jaire Alexander's season is most likely over. That's the phrase that Matt LaFleur used after Wednesday's practice, saying that he was going to undergo knee surgery, which Matt Schneidman of The Athletic would report that Jaire underwent a scope on his right knee on Tuesday of this week. And I saw an Adam Schefter report that potentially if the Packers do get to the Super Bowl, perhaps there's the opportunity at that time for Jaire Alexander to return, but they're going to have to make their postseason run if they're even going to get to that point, that part of the NFL schedule, without Jaire Alexander. And the injury he sustained was a PCL tear. It occurred during the Packers' Week 8 victory over the Jacksonville Jaguars, and obviously, he missed that following game in Week 9. The Packers had their bye in Week 10, and then in Week 11, just 3 weeks later, Jaire attempted to make a comeback in that game. He was on the field for just 10 defensive snaps before exiting the game after re-aggravating the injury. And it looked like over the last month or so that things had been trending in the right direction up until as of late. The week leading up to that Lions game, Jaire returned to practice. He was a limited participant for 2 of the 3 days that week, didn't practice the third day, and didn't play against the Lions. Following week, as the Packers are preparing for the Seattle Seahawks, he was a full participant in 2 practices, missed the third day of practice. Matt LaFleur said that Alexander wasn't hitting the speeds in terms of miles per hour that they wanted to see from him on the practice field in order for the team, Alexander, to feel comfortable with where his knee was at, his ability to go out and be effective on the football field against Seattle. So he was out for that game. Then against the New Orleans Saints recently, Jaire was a full participant for all 3 of those practices that week and was listed as questionable. So again, coming back from injury, you can see them increasing his workload in practice each week. And so again, from our outside perspective, looking in, it did seem like things were on track at that point. 2 days as a limited participant, 2 days as a full participant, 3 days as a full participant, and then questionable for the game. However, going into that New Orleans game on Monday night, Jaire was among the inactives. Obviously, he did not play in that game. And it was at that point that for us on the outside, again, with the glimpses here and there that we get, where, you know, our radar detectors should have started going off that, all right, something isn't right here. Because, well, not always, but in most instances, especially a veteran, if a player is a full participant for 3 days during the week leading up to the game, more often than not, you're going to see them on the field for that week's game. But the fact that Jaire wasn't perhaps signaled that there was some sort of setback. Something had occurred, right? And then this most recent game against the Minnesota Vikings, he was a full participant the first day of practice, limited the second day, did not practice the third. And it sounds like, from obviously we can see the trajectory going up and then his practice time going down as of late, that one would assume that there was some sort of setback that took place. And it sounds like it might not have been the first time during this process that something like that had occurred. Xavier McKinney was talking in the locker room on Wednesday and mentioned that every time Alexander, was trying to get back, he would tweak it again. So sounds like this wasn't the first time that Jaire has ran into issues during this rehab process in terms of getting his knee back to full strength for him to be back out on the football field. Matt LaFleur said this past Monday that at that time he was dealing with a swollen knee at that time. So the big question right now that we can ask ourselves is, should there have been surgery on the knee right away? Even if it wasn't after the Jacksonville game, even if they thought they could rehab it for a few weeks, get him back out on the football field, should they have went that route then, the Packers, after the Chicago game where he had the setback, re-aggravated it, and then has missed all this time and is now getting the surgery? Had he gotten the surgery following that Bears game, could he have been available for the Packers during this postseason? You know, it's a question, hypothetical, that we'll never probably have the true answer to at this time. Matt LaFleur was even asked about it on Wednesday, if looking back, should they have done surgery sooner? And, he essentially said that that's not something that they can go back and change, and they have to, this is their current reality, and that's what he's focused on right now. So Jaire's going to finish the season for the Packers, appearing in 7 games with a completion rate. He was targeted 25 times, surrendering a completion rate of just 56%, 2 interceptions, 3 pass breakups. And I've talked about this on here before. Obviously, there's those numbers. We know what Jaire can do as a player, the caliber of player he is when he's on the football field, but his presence as well, again, because of the gravity that he has, the ability that he has, the trust that you can put in him to go lock down his side of the field almost regardless of the matchup. That presence gives Jeff Hafley more flexibility when he's putting together his game plans in terms of what he asks other defenders to do, right? Like, if you know Jaire's on one side of the field, you maybe don't necessarily have to devote the same amount of safety attention over the top to that side of the field. So maybe that frees up Evan Williams or Xavier McKinney to go, help the other side or down in the box, whatever it might be. There's an added flexibility, versatility that this Packers defense gains just from having Jaire on the football field. So it's not only his production and what he can do that the Packers are going to continue to miss out on for the remainder of the season, but it's how his presence impacts what the responsibility of other defenders on this field are that the Packers are going to have to, as they've been doing, continue to attempt to overcome. Now, as we look ahead to Week 18, to the playoffs, what's next for the Packers cornerback position? It's going to be the continued heavy reliance on Carrington Valentine and Eric Stokes. And I spoke about this probably about a month or so ago now, and just talking about the cornerback position as a whole. What we had seen from this group for a large portion of the season, excluding Jaire Alexander's contributions, was a unit that lacked ball production. There's at one point, I think it was either going into the Detroit game or the Seattle game, where the Packers ranked 31st in pass deflections this season. They had, at one point, 12 interceptions in the month of December for the entire season, of course, and 7 of those belonged to Xavier McKinney. There wasn't a lot of on-ball production from the Packers' cornerback room. In addition to that, they're giving up high completion percentage numbers as well. There was one point where on the season, Eric Stokes was around the 65% mark. Keyshawn Nixon was in that same range. Carrington Valentine was around 70%. And while the defense as a whole, the cornerbacks as well, have done a nice job this year of not giving up the big downfield plays, right? I mean, think back throughout the year. There's not a lot of those plays where you see one of the Packers cornerbacks getting beat over the top, and a big part is the presence of Xavier McKinney on the back end. But when you have a lack of ball production, you have cornerbacks who are giving up big plays, even if they're only giving up 9, 10 yards per catch, which for the most part, Valentine, Stokes, Nixon have done this season. When your boundary cornerbacks only give up 9, 10 yards per catch, that's a really, really solid job of limiting production. However, 9, 10 yards per catch, when you're catching as a pass catcher, 3 out of every 4 passes that come your way, that's enough to pick up the chains. That's enough to keep the offense on the field and keep the defense on the field, picking up first downs, moving down the field, getting into scoring range. And so it was just kind of the consistency in terms of receptions being given up, even if it's relatively minimal, 8, 9, 10 yards per attempt, that was really hurting this Packers defense. Now, having said that, in recent games, we are seeing Valentine, we are seeing Stokes very much trending in the right direction. Talked about the lack of ball production. Well, last 4 games, Carrington Valentine has 4 pass breakups, according to PFF, 2 interceptions. Even looking back at his 2023 season, obviously a very good rookie campaign that he had, he did not have any stretches like that, 3, 4, 5 game stretches where he had that level of ball production in terms of both pass breakups as well as both interceptions. And Eric Stokes, I know draws the ire of many Packers fans out there, hasn't been giving up a lot of receptions. Like, the ball production isn't there, admittedly. I know he doesn't have an interception. I don't think he has a pass breakup at all this season, but he's not giving up many receptions either. The last 6 games, Stokes has allowed 7 completions on just 15 targets. That completion rate, 46%, is the second lowest among qualified cornerbacks during that 6-game stretch. Not giving up receptions. Carrington Valentine's making plays on the football, and Stokes said that a big shift that he's had over the second half of the season, because if you look at his first 9 games, he was giving up a completion rate of over 68%. Last 6 games, it's down to 46%. He said a big factor is just the comfort level that he has playing in Jeff Hafley's defense, what he's supposed to do, his responsibilities, roles of the defenders around him are a big part in just the improved play that we've seen from him this season. Now, throughout much of the year, we saw a rotation taking place between Stokes and Valentine. Packers were waiting for someone to really grab hold of that starting spot opposite of Keyshawn Nixon, and recently it's been Carrington Valentine. Balfour said that he's a young player, but he's done a good job of addressing the elements, the aspects of his game that the Packers wanted him to work on, and we've seen him come out and be that starter opposite of Keyshawn Nixon. When they're in their base defense, their 4-3 look, it's Carrington Valentine who's on the field. It's not Carrington Valentine for a possession, Eric Stokes for a possession. It's Carrington Valentine. This past week with Javon Bullard in the mix at the nickel before Zane Anderson exited the game, again, it was Nixon on the boundary. It was Carrington Valentine opposite of him. There wasn't any rotation that was taking place. So Valentine has stepped up his play, checked the boxes that the Packers wanted to see from him, and he's earned that full-time starting playing time. Now, we've also seen, obviously, a lot of Eric Stokes during the stretch because of injuries. When Javon Bullard is out the last few weeks, Nixon moved to the slot. Then Stokes and Valentine were the starting boundary quarterbacks this last game. When Zane Anderson exited the game, Packers were already without Evan Williams. Bullard had to move from the nickel to safety, so Nixon moved to the slot, and then Stokes was back out there starting. So he's seen a lot of action this last few weeks as well. But as the Packers get more healthy at the safety position, having Bullard back in the mix, it seems like, based on what we've seen so far, that it's going to be a pretty steady presence from Carrington Valentine out there, with Eric Stokes providing depth off the bench. Now, a big part of the potential success that Stokes, Valentine could have in the coming weeks, Packers defense is going to need more from their pass rush unit. That group has to get after the quarterback much more consistently than what they have been. Go back and watch the last video. We talked about how big of an issue that was against the Minnesota Vikings, where Sam Darnold, over the middle of the field overall, picked apart this Packers secondary, picked apart the Green Bay defense between the numbers. And even if you had Jaire Alexander on the field for that game, if that type of offense with Darnold at quarterback, just the talent they have at the pass-catching position, if you're going to give that quarterback, that offense, 3-4 seconds of time in the pocket consistently over and over and over again, even with Jaire Alexander on the field, that is a tall task for your secondary to have to go out and cover Hawkinson, Jefferson, Addison repeatedly when they have to defend for that long and stick close by in coverage that long. So, a big part of the equation for Valentine's success, Stokes' success, the secondary success in the playoffs is going to be how this Packers pass rush performs, and specifically the consistency that they're able to get after the quarterback with. Now, all eyes, especially for opposing offenses, likely going to be on Stokes and Valentine as we get to the playoffs, because especially with how good this Packers run defense has been this season. I mean, this is a top 5 unit in terms of yards per rush allowed. They've been pretty steadily hanging around that mark for a good chunk of the season. So if you're even on paper, again, we all know game of football is not played on paper, but if on paper you're looking at, all right, how do we go after this Packers defense? Passing game, right? Go after those cornerbacks. The pass rush hasn't done a consistent job of getting after the quarterback, whereas the run game has done a good job of limiting opposing offenses and done so against some pretty dynamic running games, some pretty dynamic running backs. So the Packers cornerbacks are going to have a tall task in that regard, because one, I think that's where the attention is going to be from opposing offenses. But you get to the playoffs, you're going against the best of the best. Teams in the NFC, Tampa Bay, Philadelphia, Minnesota, and Detroit. All 4 of those offenses ranked top 10 in scoring and ranked top 10 in yards per pass attempt. They're really good at generating big plays through the air. And not to be forgotten about, of course, is the Rams with Matthew Stafford, who, as we all know, can throw the ball around as well and take advantage of opposing secondary. So a big challenge is obviously ahead for Valentine, for Stokes, coming up here in the postseason, but some positive news. And of course, you're only as good as your last performance, right? But they are trending in the right direction. But obviously going to have to continue on that path. Xavier McKinney's presence on the back end, obviously going to play an important factor in limiting those yards through the air. The pass rush, their ability to get after the quarterback, the importance of the Packers offense, complementary football, getting out to some early leads, which again, won't be easy against playoff caliber teams, but that is part of the equation. Not falling behind by 7, 10, 14 points early on, keeping the game close, jumping out to early leads to help make the opposing offense one-dimensional. All of those elements are going to be factors in helping the Packers cornerbacks out, right? We talked about in the last video with the linebacker position, where the Packers were attacked over the middle of the field, making sure that there's the proper depth between the linebackers and the safeties at the second level, so there isn't this huge amount of space for the opposing offense to run through to take advantage of. So again, all eyes, and like I said, I think a lot of the opposing offenses are going to look at Stokes, Valentine, say, all right, what do we have to do to go after them? But it's a game of football. It's going to take a collective team effort on the Packers' defensive part, and like we just mentioned, even the offense helping out as well to take some of that workload, right, off of their shoulders. Last thing I'll say before we get out of here, going back to before the draft, for April, Brian Gutekunst has repeatedly talked about the confidence that he has in the depth of the Packers cornerback position throughout training camp. Matt LaFleur has done the same as well. And that's more than just coach speak and GM speak, right? Because the Packers' actions as an organization back up those words. You can say you're confident in a position group, but not drafting a cornerback until the 7th round shows that that's truly how you feel and what you believe, even when you had the opportunity to do so early on in the draft. Knowing that Jaire Alexander is working through an injury at the trade deadline and not making an addition, again, goes to show that there's a confidence in the group that you have constructed. Now, whether that confidence is accurate, whether it's misguided, two different questions, right? But the feeling's there, the belief is there internally. And now in the coming weeks, the playoffs here, we just went through the caliber of not just offenses, but passing offenses that this Packers cornerback room, secondary defense is going to have to contend with. We're going to find out the answer. We're going to truly find out the answer to that question, because the level of success that Valentine has, that Eric Stokes has, it's obviously going to play a big role, a big factor in determining the level of team success that the Packers have come the playoffs. So if you made it this far in the video, one, I appreciate it, but as long as you're here, might as well hit like, might as well hit subscribe. Like I said, I do greatly appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. Find all my work over at ESPNlacrosse.com. My Wisconsin sports radio fans, download the 105.5 ESPN Lacrosse app. Until next time, friends, take care.